Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. These are Google search terms. This is not a perfect absolute number. These are relative comparison between several terms I put in there, and it's showing how over time, how these compare relative to each other. So this is a relative scale, and it's comparing coronavirus is blue, George Floyd is red, and Trump for a baseline is that, because he's always in the news, is sort of this orange. And it only goes back to May 17th. And what I wanted to do was capture the dynamics of national attention. Where does national attention go relative to Google terms? Now, I did check a lot of other terms. People like, what about racism, police brutality, COVID-19, other terms for the president I could use, but I'm not because it's a family blog. All of those were at lower values. These seem to be the most popular search terms. So I thought it was equivalent to compare them. And what you see here is that the coronavirus has had a fairly constant, steady decline, but still at very high volumes. What happens with the George Floyd protest is for a period of time, it rises and eclipses coronavirus as a story of national concern, again, relative to Google searches. And you can see this is the period that if you looked at my, when we talked about the dictator's dilemma, the protests were going on, there was escalations of riots, the Trump cleared Lafayette Square with illegal tactics, there was a threat of the insurrection, and it began declining pretty quickly and has been on a steady decline since then, which means that there's you know, it's not saying there's waning interest in the protests. There's still lots of protests, but in terms of an aggregate level national interest, you see that it's struggling to maintain that mind share, and that's the challenge that arises in these situations, is not, you know, are riots good or bad, or are protests good or bad, or talking those specific things, but how do you convert the kinetic energy of an iceberg being converted to kinetic energy in one of these things? How do you convert it to sustained momentum if you want to create systemic change and create enough of a mass mobilization that keeps things on the surface to be able to support those efforts? You can see here Trump rose as the, and it's probably kind of, there was this, you know, he was playing to his base about, and also gaining mind share from being more provocative as he's interjecting himself. So you can see here he's interjecting himself, but he also declines, and the decline here almost perfectly coincides with Lafayette Square. You could draw June 1st with here on Lafayette Square, and his invocation of the Insurrection Act, and it just drops out. But also within these questions of how to sustain momentum is this question of what's getting more airtime. Is it defund the police? Is it campaign zero? Is it these programs? So I mean, Minneapolis 150. So to describe these programs real quick, when I do violence reduction research, there's programs out there for reducing police interaction or police disparity. The Black Lives Matter originally recommended campaign zero in 2014, 2015. There is one that was called the MSP 150, the Minneapolis 150. These are it's talking about, it's the 150 is 150 years of police disparity. That had a lot of radical proposals in it, but it was a kind of well thought out program, certainly more on the radical side, but very well developed. MSP 150 is the basis of defund the police. It goes from complicated things of breaking these icebergs, right? How do we dismantle these icebergs I've just discussed? That's what MSP 150 is. That gets shortened and becomes defund the police, which, causes some controversy. Is that a good name or a bad name? And then suddenly Seattle comes swooping in with the, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and we can see the change in interest nationally play out across these four terms. So what you see here is in the last, going back to June 1st, so this is during the Floyd protest, you see campaign zero is gaining traction, getting a little bit, then it's taken over. So these are, again, yellow campaign zero, green defund the police, red police reform is kind of a generic baseline that I took, and blue is Chaz. So you see campaign zero start to get interest and then decline as defund the police, and defund the police is getting oxygen. It again hits that decline point and begins losing momentum, and then suddenly Seattle, swooping in from the sidelines with Chaz, all of a sudden takes all the oxygen out of the room. I mean, it is just this is sort of amazing how much you call it CHOP or Chaz, autonomous or occupied protest. There's all sorts of names going around. This is this peaceful Capitol Hill protest that when the police withdrew in Seattle from the precinct after having a very, the police were a provocative force in the weekend before, and they kind of realized they'd been that. So they withdrew from Capitol Hill. The protest area went in. It went through a bunch of name changes. It's still going on. But you can see here how it takes the oxygen right out of the conversation. So instead of nationwide reform, now this isn't saying things aren't going on. I know for a fact there's been new budgets being voted in. Minneapolis voted to defund its police. Other cities are voting in to reduce its. LA did a major budget shift of dollars from the LAPD to other services. So there's still action going on. These Google search trends are only reflecting a very aggregate, crude national level interest. It's not a perfect number, but it's a representational number. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.